It's been more than 4 months ever since Three Hopes came out, and during this period, Nintendo Dream released their own developer interviews in the game, first back in May and now recently in October. While those familiar with the channel might be aware that I already did a video about its development, I feel it was also worth covering these as they cover details the others missed. So here are 9 things that were discussed in the developer interview in that article.
Who are you? Another one?
I'm your... it doesn't matter who I am. My origin story's kind of a mess. You know what? I'm just gonna take it again from the top.
Three Hopes was almost FE Warriors 2. While this was briefly touched upon in my first video, the new interviews focus a great deal into how close Three Hopes was early on into becoming Fire Emblem Warriors 2, as in that the game almost featured characters from previous FE entries, with the catch that Fódlan's world would have served as the centerpiece. While we had decided to use the setting of 3 houses, we also discussed possibly introducing characters from past titles, but as development progressed alongside Nintendo and Intelligent Systems, we decided that it would be best to focus on just 3 houses and create a story that could have plausibly happened in that world. As mentioned earlier in the interview, we thought that originally it wouldn't be a great idea to focus solely on 3 houses. This made us think of an idea to bring in a gate from another dimension that brought the other Fire Emblem characters, while making the list for which characters to bring. But while developing it, it made us realize that for 3 houses to shine, it was better to only use the characters from 3 houses, so we scrapped the idea of mixing the other titles.
Either way. I guess. Now what? Huh? Are you kidding me? When mercs want to celebrate a win, we slap our open palms together, like that.
The stories' new focus. Each of Three Hopes' stories were planned to be distinct from the ones in 3 houses. For this, KT's writers suggested that a way to do it would be depicting the plot points left unresolved back in the Crimson Flower, Azure Moon, and Verdant Wind roots. In Edelgard's case, Scarlet Blaze would address her battle against those who slither in the dark. With Dimitri, Azure Gleam would unravel the mystery of the tragedy of Duscur, and finally, Golden Wildfire would present Claude a huge obstacle stopping him from realizing his dream. A bigger focus was also given to the military facet of the story. In particular, there was an interest in exploring the idea of Claude's moniker, the Master Tactician, as 3 houses focused only on showing his good side and didn't display the true extent of his tactics and morality once pressured enough. Lastly, the main game taking place in 1182, 2 years after the start of 3 houses, while also featuring characters who were previously only mentioned in the original game, happened mostly due to the developers feeling it was the most natural choice given the story's direction. Was it Koei Tecmo's suggestion to introduce characters who didn't appear in the original? It wasn't suggested on its own, but they naturally came up in the process of making the story. Since this title centers around war, it makes sense that the older generation would be more involved than the students. That made it necessary in our minds to bring those people into the picture and depict how they interact with the students. I think an underlying theme of this title is how the students and the older generation grow as they conflict at times and cooperate at others. I did get the sense that the adults played a large role in the story. Since we didn't have the exchanges at the military academy anymore, we wanted to bring out the game's charm in other ways. Introducing new characters was one way we did that.
Worth a try.
It's a surprise to see you here, Dimitri.
I wouldn't be, if Claude would simply deign to leave me alone.
The Lord's redesigns. On a related note, the new stories also shaped the post-timeskip redesigns of the house leaders. For example, as Edelgard is no longer tied to the Agarthans in 3 Hopes, her Emperor outfit was designed to invoke the freedom that comes with this change. Dimitri's redesign, meanwhile, put emphasis on the quote-unquote loneliness caused by him assuming Faerghast's throne earlier. And with Claude, focus was given on his attire oozing noble leadership, and his ties to both Almyra and the Golden Deer.
In any event, you labored to destroy my vessel, did you not? That is a deed most foul.
Developer worry over enemy Byleth. On a more humorous note, there was a bit of fear within the developers regarding making Byleth a recurring antagonist and publicly revealing it, mostly due to the fact they expected many Three Houses players who ended up liking them to not react well to the news. We went around asking how people felt about making Byleth into an enemy in order for people to re-experience the conflict of Three Houses. We even asked the original staff, is it okay to defeat Byleth? We considered the conflict itself the theme that was the most appealing in Three Houses, so we wanted to not avoid anything about it. However, the more someone played Three Houses, the more they would empathize with Byleth, so we were scared to announce this publicly. Monsters were almost cut. This might be shocking to know for anyone who has played Three Houses, but the giant monster enemy characteristic of Fódlan were not considered for Three Hopes at first, as the developers thought it would be too difficult to implement, and the only reason they ended up in the game was because someone from Koei Tecmo that worked on Three Houses convinced them that Fódlan wouldn't be Fódlan without them. The truth is, at first we didn't plan to add monsters, because we agreed it would be difficult to put monsters into a Warriors title. That was when someone at our company who worked on Three Houses had a talk with us. They said, if it's in the setting of Three Houses, it can't not have monsters. We reconsidered and decided that we had made a judgment error if that was what an original staff member thought, so we decided to implement monsters after all.
This would be a great spot to command an army. You can see for miles in every direction.
Expeditions. Expeditions in Three Hopes were designed with the idea of capturing the same experience of Three Houses' Tea Time feature, in particular due to how well it was received by the fanbase. While looking for a way to not recreate it one-to-one, someone from the team mentioned horse riding was a popular pastime around the Middle Ages, and the idea of exploring some area by horse snowballed from there. Early on, expeditions were called picnics, but changed names when the developers considered that maybe going out to a picnic in the middle of a war didn't mesh too well. The multiple dialogue choices and prompts possible during expeditions were done for the sake of having Shez's interactions with the other characters feel like a two-sided conversation. Finally, they put a ton of effort in making the feature stand out, not only by providing 4 visually attractive locations to visit, whose backgrounds were completely redone at one point, but also by making everything shine in them more than usual. Nevertheless, we thought it was an indispensable element during the development process. We tried to figure out what a good form that fits with the wartime setting and plot would be, and someone mentioned that horse riding was a sports-like pastime in the Middle Ages in Europe, which led us to the idea that riding on a horse together to go out and explore might be an opportunity for conversation. Tea time in Three Houses is held in the Abbey, but since the premise this time was that you're setting off from an outpost, we wanted to create an activity with a more open feel, which ultimately led to the expedition format.
Behold, as I prove once again to be the superior worker in this most menial of tasks.
If you are that superior, perhaps I will simply let you do everything.
Base Camp. The main feelings the devs wanted to capture with your faction's chosen camps was to show how the characters spend their lives in the context of the war. And dogs and cats were added because they were already there in Three Houses. Take a scene where the protagonist has a meal. For example, it's not just 2 people, but there are many other friends and allies who surround the area. We tried hard to include these small details to give life to the characters. When compared to the original Three Houses, this base camp is kept compact. We cut down on spaces, but instead placed more emphasis on having characters live in these spaces and made it more present in the game. On what basis did you choose the 4 different destinations? We looked for pictures of locations that looked like they would be nice to have a conversation in, and had locations created to be similar to those. Reintroduced cut content? It's mentioned in the interviews that much of the content involving the expanded lore and the no longer unseen characters from Fódlan seen in Three Hopes was first envisioned for Three Houses, but it didn't make the cut in the end. In Three Hopes, there are many characters who made an appearance like Holst or Leopold, Caspar's dad, who were previously only heard of in stories, but there are also many new characters who were hardly touched on in the original story. For example, people from Elmira, which was a country next to Claude's hometown. Like Shahid, who is his half-brother, you need to dig deeper into Claude's background to understand him better. For this reason, Shahid was one of the characters who we wanted to give an appearance in the game from the start of development. There are actually many characters and backstories that were made for Three Houses but never made it into the game. We wanted to use those unused parts since we were remaking it as a Warriors title. All these details were things that were originally supposed to be told in Three Houses but couldn't be implemented.
Why would you want to give me something so precious? I don't know if this is an equal exchange, but here, it's something I've treasured.
And finally, the Merc Whistle. While, as stated in the previous video, the developers didn't want Three Hopes entirely to invalidate Byleth's experiences from Three Houses, they also didn't want to remove the S supports entirely in this game. As such, the Merc Whistle Shez can give to any character of their choice whom they have seen their A support, and by proxy, the gift they receive in return was made with this in mind, as they wanted players to get a special interaction with the characters they felt closer towards regardless. Among these 9 developer details, which one did you find most intriguing, surprising, or disappointing? For me, the most intriguing and surprising one was that Three Hopes was almost going to have an Outrealm gate. Alas, maybe Fire Emblem Engage will have the Hector cameo I so desperately want. Hope you all enjoyed today's video. If you did, please leave a like and comment down below to help boost this video in the searches. And if you're new to the channel, please subscribe. The channel just hit 102,000 subscribers, so thank you to all who recently joined. And finally, if you want to support me and get to know me better, consider checking out the Patreon down below. That's all, deuces.